All right, so we're running just a little bit behind schedule today, so we're going to try to dive in soon. I first just want to thank Melinda and Wayne for recognizing the importance of policy in helping to address the tech inclusion problem and how we can all do better and what policies might be out there that we can use to do better. I also want to thank them for assembling this really wonderful panel. We've got people who can speak to all different sort of aspects of government angles of how to approach this issue, people from the executive branch, people who've worked on the Hill, people who've worked with local government. And I should introduce myself. I'm Brooke Hunter. I'm with Engine, and we support tech entrepreneurship, and a lot of how we do that is through advocacy with state, local, and federal government. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to each of you to introduce yourselves.
I guess I'll go first. My name is Marvin Carr. I'm a policy advisor for Megan Smith, who's the Chief Technology Officer of the United States of America at the White House.
And I'm Terah Lyons. I'm actually Marvin's colleague at the White House in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, and I work there in the division, the Technology and Innovation Division under Tom Khalil.
Good morning. I am Velvet Johnson. I work for the U.S. Department of Defense, where I work on cybersecurity and critical infrastructure protection issues.
Good morning, I'm John Hiester. I'm the Director of Operations and Strategy for Year Up Bay Area. Year Up prepares young adults for tech careers, and also we want to change policy and practices broadly for inclusion for all young adults into the tech workforce.
And so I wanted to start just asking everyone on the panel to talk about what examples of sort of success that they've seen at different levels of government. I think that policy is, it's a very broad word and it encompasses so many different things. So Marvin, I know you've worked a lot at the executive branch. Could you talk about some of what you've seen that's worked well?
So hello again, everybody. Thanks for inviting us here. It's a great conference. For us, the president does a great job of giving us all the autonomy to go out into the community to find things and elevate them. And so what we do oftentimes, we use what we call 3.0 methods, right? We try our best not to create any new policies, any new programs. We go out to places like Europe, like Youth Build, to find examples in the ecosystem where people are doing amazing things, elevate them, iterate them, and then share them to the entire community. So one of those examples would be My Brother's Keeper. My Brother's Keeper is the president's initiatives to bring opportunities for all students, for all young people, particularly for young students at the margins, young students who need help finding opportunities. And so we need all of your help to continue to help those students. And so this is one example.
Terah?
Similarly, we, just as Marvin said, we really like to elevate people who themselves are committed to best practices. And one example of that kind of elevation recently in the White House was an event that we ran with the president back in August called White House Demo Day. And it was the first time we ever did anything of the sort. We actually invited over 90 amazing startup founders to the White House with 200 plus guests from industry to basically pitch their companies to the president, and not in the traditional sort of pitching for funding sense, but in much more of a storytelling way. And the point of that exercise, and I should mention at the top of this actually, that Demo Day's focus was actually pretty explicitly upon diversity and inclusion in the innovation economy. And so the purpose of Demo Day was essentially to show the world that anyone can actually start a company and anyone can and join the tech industry, and good ideas come from anywhere. So in conjunction with that process, we also put out a public call to action and ended up galvanizing the entire innovation ecosystem around this idea that we actually are not reaching our full potential because we have so many players left on the bench. And one thing that we did related to that was actually stand up a web form on the website, the whitehouse.gov website, which is such a simple engagement mechanism, but we had thousands of public responses through that mechanism, and it just showed to us the amount of energy that's behind this issue and in the public, and we got some amazing ideas from that. So to Marvin's earlier point, a lot of what we did was actually just collect amazing things that were happening and tell the world about them so that people could actually commit themselves to do similar things.
So prior to coming to the Department of Defense, I spent 7 years working on Capitol Hill. So one initiative that I've noticed, there's been a big push for diversity in tech from Capitol Hill, mainly the Congressional Black Caucus. And I know Congresswoman Lee was here earlier today, and so one thing that they're really promoting is CBC Tech 2020. And that's a partnership with private sector tech companies along with historically black colleges and universities to help build the STEM pipeline and get more minorities involved in tech careers. So that's something that's definitely being pushed, and also in addition to that, additional funding for STEM education and technology-based education as well.
In terms of what's working, I might start in an overall sense. I think what's great is that in the last year and a half, Brooke and I were talking just before the panel, we've seen so much happening at a national level that I think is this broad recognition that we need to build a bigger funnel with fewer holes from the communities into the tech sector. And so My Brother's Keeper's example of that as this demo day. Some work that also is happening, the New American Apprenticeship Program is a Department of Labor initiative to really build that traditional concept of what an apprenticeship is and convert that into tech sector pipelines. Another example, I've been working with Mayor Liccardo's office in the city of San Jose on Tech Hire, which is an initiative from the White House to get communities to build public-private sector partnerships that will build broad, robust pipelines into the tech sector that are targeted at actual jobs and that have a short time horizon for completion. So really finding that quick connection to the labor market. And San Jose, San Francisco, Oakland, as well as 25 other cities across the country or something like that are tech hire cities. So this has been all catalyzed from a federal level, but really trickles down to local city and regional strategies as well.
And I wanted to ask a question for Marvin and Terah. This presidency, this president has done so much in terms of innovative programs. United States Digital Service is such a great program. If you don't know about it, I recommend you look it up. My Brother's Keeper, Tech Hire, all of these really great initiatives. And my question is, since this is just sort of, to me, an almost unprecedented amount of sort of new program generation, what happens at the end of this administration to those programs?
Sure, yeah. It's a question we ask ourselves with high frequency, actually. So part of our jobs, in addition to generating, things that solve problems, is actually making sure that those solutions exist into perpetuity, or at least until those problems have been effectively solved. Right, and the unfortunate aspect of leadership turnover is that sometimes there's programmatic turnover as well. So in order to combat that, we frequently actually end up exporting a lot of these policy implementations, like Tech Hire and a lot of the work done with MBK and other programs that you mentioned, to outside stakeholder groups that are effective, incredibly effective operators themselves. And to do so, sometimes a new nonprofit foundation is stood up, sometimes a pre-existing outside organization who is well positioned to tackle the issue moving forward is sort of the one to raise their hands and sort of volunteer to take up the baton from the administration, and then frequently also we use the agencies actually as a pretty amazing tool to help us continue implementing work post-administration. So I think Marvin actually can talk a little bit about how we use that implement as well.
So specifically for My Brother's Keeper, I think last maybe May or something, the president was in Brooklyn. We announced the formation of a private nonprofit called the My Brother's Keeper Alliance, which is committed to the same 6 goals at the federal level that My Brother's Keeper has. And they're just doing they're kind of like a startup phase now, but they're doing the exact same work, and that is going to exist on and on, but regardless of who's president. And so they're making the same connections, having the same funding, and just doing the same work, just amazing work that's going to continue on. And so that's kind of like kind of what Terah said earlier. We believe that all the answers don't exist, and all the solutions don't exist in government. And so our job oftentimes is using these people I know methods, going out into the community, going out into the world, and finding solutions and elevating them and connecting them to resources so that the ownership of the solutions belongs to the American people, not necessarily tied to the administration.
I think that's an excellent point, and that's actually something else that I wanted to talk about. Like, one thing, I'm so happy to see that so many people are here and interested in a panel discussion about policy, because that's fantastic, especially outside of Washington, D.C. It's really affirming for those of us who live in D.C. to see that there's a lot of energy to talk about this stuff. So, but one thing that I really want to emphasize is that policy is everyone's tool, right? This is your tool. You can use policy to better the world. And so I know that a lot of the people in the audience right now would like to know, what are some of the best ways that they can actually influence policy? And so all of you sort of have different experience. What do you recommend? How can people get involved and really make a difference in the policy landscape?
Well, I think one thing that I think is maybe the most pronounced action somebody could take is to be respondent to calls to action that places like the White House or the president put out. I'll give one example, again, related to that web form that I talked about on the whitehouse.gov website earlier, related to Demo Day. We sometimes, I think it's very easy for stakeholders to think that a simple web form is something that nobody will listen to, but actually, I can personally tell you, I spent a weekend at work trawling through every single one of those thousands of answers that we received, and they were passed around our policy council and other policy councils, and we truly do listen to public comment, and sort of, related to Marvin's earlier point about finding and lifting up best practices. In many ways, the federal government, I think, frequently acts as a talent scout more than anything, in that we do our best to find solutions to problems that are already working, maybe in the deep crevices of the American population that haven't necessarily received the lift that they should, and then we do our very best to lift them up subsequently. So the more active you are as stakeholders in telling us about what you're doing and why it's effective, the more capable we are of actually helping your story get told. So I would say speak up when you're afforded the opportunity to do so, definitely.
And I would also, just to piggyback on Terah's point as well, I will also say build coalitions, find organizations that share common goals as well. I know when I worked on the Hill, we would get calls from constituents all the time, and so it would make a big difference if one organization called as opposed to 100 organizations calling about the same bill or the same proposal. So I would say definitely identify organizations, stakeholders that hold similar goals, and also, be a champion for your issue. Most congressional offices, they have hearings, they have roundtables. Meet with your local representative. They also have staffers in every local office as well. So talk about some of the things that you're doing on your local level and make sure that your congressional representatives are aware.
In addition to all that, I think there's a lot of levels locally that you can also be involved. Cities are driving a lot of this work. Counties are driving a lot of this work. Santa Clara County, where I work, is one of the more innovative counties in the country in how they are administering funds would pay for success. So I think, be aware of what's happening at your local and city level and finding those commissions, those opportunities to buy in as a stakeholder. And the other thing I would say is use your position in your company and be the person in your company that makes sure that your company is involved in a tech hire commitment and that you're involved in these initiatives like My Brother's Keeper that they don't work unless there's a public-private partnership. So I think using your positions and really driving your company to really invest in the private side of that public-private partnership, and that's something that will help this ecosystem stay healthy and grow. So that might mean bringing your team to an event that's hosted. It might mean actually bringing a city council member or a staffer into your company to say what you're doing and what challenges you're facing. So there's just a lot of ways, and lift your head up, be aware of what's out in their ecosystem, and use your company as a tool to get this work done.
To John's point, I'm going to do a little plug here. I've learned a lot from Terah. When I first started, I was an intern, and Terah, I think Terah may have started working at the same time when I first started. But what I've learned is that oftentimes the way to solutions is by going to the American public, to companies, to private companies, to nonprofits, and to individuals, and asking them to publicly commit to helping to solve a problem. And so one of the great things the president has pushed forward is My Brother's Keeper. As we're going into year 3 of My Brother's Keeper, we're going to be focusing on one thing. The first year of My Brother's Keeper, nowhere did we mention the word STEM or science or innovation or entrepreneurship. And then this next year, that's going to be coming pretty soon, we're going to be announcing My Brother's Keeper STEM, where we're going to be adding entrepreneurship and innovation and science technology to everyone's My Brother's Keepers plan. And so right now we're just looking for commitments from all types of organizations and companies. How can you support MBK STEM, right? So one of the so an example commitment is from Department of Energy, Defense, NASA, all these agencies that have committed next March to open up all national labs to MBK communities. Just to expose all types of students, but particularly students that are marginalized students or students who are disconnected to science technology at the national labs. We have different other commitments from organizations that are committed to training and placing job placement for My Brother's Keeper community students into tech jobs, into tech training programs. So we're looking for commitments from your organizations, from your nonprofits on ways in 3 specific areas on how you can expose My Brother's Keeper students. This is students of all backgrounds, particularly students that are marginalized or students of the margins. Train these students either in STEM and tech jobs, and then 3, job placement for these students. And so either you can make the commitment, your company, or you can get others around you from your communities to make those commitments.
Yeah, and I just want to sort of pick up on the note that you were both talking about businesses and how important it is for businesses to get involved in policy discussions. So, my organization represents really a lot of startups, and there is such an appetite on the Hill to hear from the startup community. And so many of you work for startups or are involved with startups, and I just want to take a moment to please beg you to please engage politically. You can make a big difference. This is a community that is having a moment. And on the Hill, people just can't get enough of startups, and they really want to hear from you. And they want to know, what are your barriers to entry? What are your barriers to success? Because they know that they don't know everything, and they need some education. And really a lot of that is incumbent upon you to say, this is what I need from you, government. Someone yesterday from one of the D&I people on the panel was saying, well, we haven't heard from anyone in the disability community. The government is the same way. They need to hear from you to know what your problems are, to know what your struggles are. And so I really encourage you on the personal level and the organizational and business level to please reach out and tell people, what it is that you need, what it is that you're struggling with, what it is that they could do better.
There's a government agency or a government entity that is speaking to every possible issue an American is having. Every possible issue, and this is the wealthiest government in the entire world. And one thing that the president is dedicated to is ensuring that all government, especially that he can control in the agencies, opportunities are public. And so one of the most important things in this administration is its drive for open data, for open government. And so for most agencies, everything that you can possibly know about the agency is open and available online. This is going to be trying to be the most transparent agency, the most transparent presidency in the history of the nation. And so all possible resource that you can look for, it's open online. And all it takes, oftentimes, this is going to sound like it's very simple, but contacting that agency. But it's not that simple always. Of course, we know that, right? But just looking for and just pressing and pressing and pressing, because those resources are there. Billions of dollars have gone into STEM education, right? It's just about finding your niche, finding where you can look for money and resources at. Contacting that agency or that program or that block grant or that micro grant from the Department of Labor or Commerce, or even the Department of Defense has a lot of funding for STEM education and for outreach. And so the money and the resources are there. We just have to find ways to connect. And so oftentimes that's what we try to do. We try to connect the people to the resources. And it's hard if we don't know what the people need.
Agreed. So, one of the things that I hear a lot from people is just there is this skepticism that there's much that can actually get done at the policy level, particularly at the federal level. And I'm not going to put all of you on the spot and make you answer that question, but whoever feels comfortable, what, if any of you feel comfortable answering this question, like what would you say to people that have some skepticism about things getting accomplished in the policy world, like setting aside the wonderful examples that Marvin and Terah have given from executive branch and what they've done recently?
I can actually speak a little bit to that, but probably the most unlikely person to address it. And pardon me if it's a naive answer. I think we can look to last year as one of the key pieces of legislation that actually had bipartisan support was the reauthorization of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which is the piece of legislation that it tells the government how we're spending our money on workforce development, which is the system that is supposed to train Americans for the job that our economy needs them to do. So it's a pretty big, important piece of legislation, and it was really outdated. And there was bipartisan support to it, I think, in part because the skills gap and the need for talent from the private sector was so well articulated. And so that's where all of you come in, and to make sure that your talent needs and that your data is on point to tell the picture that we really need to be investing in more pipelines for talent. And the more that we can work together to do that, I think the more support we will drive from the legislative bodies. So that's one perspective I'll bring.
Great. And again, I didn't prepare any of you for this question, so feel free to pass it. But you know, I was just wondering about maybe giving people more examples of what can be done at the agency level. So for instance, you know, we work a lot on access to capital for startups. And so we work with the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Small Business Administration. Like, does anyone have examples of how you can harness the agencies maybe to make some specific changes?
Yeah, I can speak to one example in particular that I think is extremely effective, which is that we recently announced in the last 2 months or so the rollout of a new initiative through the White House and the U.S. Small Business Administration, an agency called Startup in a Day. And the premise of Startup in a Day is actually to approach a very specific pain point about starting a business in America, which is that what we found through copious research and even some of our own personal experiences, it takes entrepreneurs in the US an average of 3 days, actually, to endure the process of applying for and submitting all the permitting and licensing requirements required to actually stand up a business in America, which is a huge time and energy loss, and actually a huge structural impediment to becoming an entrepreneur in the US. And the unfortunate aspect of that particular challenge is that it differs based on where you are, right? So based on local ordinances, based on state requirements, and based on even the federal layer of policies required to start a business, it just differs based on what city you are or what locality. And so the White House completely relied on the U.S. Small Business Administration as a partner in that instance because what the SBA has that we don't have is a direct connection to a lot of different startup ecosystems and communities across America. There are a ton of small business resource centers across the US run by the SBA, and they also have direct connection to a lot of localities that are either well known as startup hubs or not. And one thing that they did was really help work with the local elected government in those areas to try to address the particular challenges that they were faced with in getting entrepreneurs to more successfully be able to submit those requirements. So they ended up running actually a national challenge prize competition related to creating more friendly and navigable online platforms. And I think it was just a really good example of one person coming to the White House with a problem, which was very simplistic, but hopefully something that we would be capable of solving. And having the agency community really step up and step in and play a leadership role in doing that. And it's something now that we have a ton of levels of government involved in, right? It's everything from the White House on down to really the mayoral level in a lot of these communities. So I think that's, for me, it's like a very optimistic example of what can be accomplished with some simplistic feedback and subsequent engagement at every level of government.
Great, thank you. So I think we're running a little bit low on time, and I want to make sure that those of you that are here get a chance to ask some questions. And I see lots of hands going up, which is so exciting. Oh my goodness. So I don't know if there is a mic person or if somebody needs one of our mics. Oh, excellent. So I see a hand over here, lots over on this side.
Good morning. Thank you so much. My name is Carla Mays. I have a company, Mays Civic Innovation, and this is all I do all day long, is talk with public officials here and around the country. The question I have is that the process is very cumbersome in getting, first, economic development agencies, and agencies don't necessarily understand what is needed to create a diverse tech sector. Things that we see in Canada and in the EU are far more advanced in being able to support our entrepreneur ecosystems and our entrepreneurs that come from different countries here to Silicon Valley are more supported. I had a conversation with Secretary Sweet on her trip here a couple months ago in talking about why don't we have startup grants, and our women development centers for small business don't have, there's barriers for them in cost. The cost of attending, the cost of registering their business, these issues, and those of us who create the pre-accelerators, there's no funding for us to do this work. And we're constantly having to come to these kind of events. We're looking for money. We're looking for money for our entrepreneurs. There needs to be a level playing field, like what we have. Like when you think about student loans, right? You go and you get a FAFSA or whatever, and you're automatically. Can there be a system that's set up for having a small business loan that would be similar to what it's like to get a FAFSA? These are the issues that those of us who are struggling to work on tech inclusion. How do we work better with you? Because we seem to be chasing you and running all around you, but not able to really put the infrastructure into place. So my question is, how do we do a better job at that? Because it's like I've submitted thousands of those forms. We've gone to things where the president, when it comes to Silicon Valley, how do we work with you hand in hand?
That is an excellent question. Who wants to take it?
I'll take it.
I'm happy to follow up.
And she has to follow. So I can only speak to my experience and to things that I've seen and to outcomes and to actual work that's being done. So on your question about the applications in small business administration, I can tell you that there's a group of amazing techies that are slowly being added to Barack Obama's tech startup, right, that we call United States Digital Service. And the USDS all across the government, it's really changing what technology means in the government, changing the approach to innovation in the government. For example, there's a team of PIFs, Presidential Innovation Fellows, and folks on 18F who are at the Small Business Administration that are currently working to do exactly what you said, which is working on their website.
Those of us who are doing it.
So they're currently working to do that. So they're currently fixing the website and just the mechanisms to interface with the American people. So a lot of the government websites are receive only, right, not a feedback. And so there's a move right now to, yes, a very Web 1, to move to 2.0 and 3.0 kind of approaches in the websites. And so that's my answer to the what are we doing now to change the direction of information flow to and from the people to the government.
So when's the design thinking coming when we can work together like we do here in the Valley on changing these problems?
Well, the one thing I'd say to that is that, unfortunately, the community with which we work encompasses the entire American population. And I shouldn't say that's unfortunate at all, because it's actually our jobs, and it's something that we're thrilled to do. But it does make for an extremely high communication burden, right, in terms of not just us receiving feedback, but us also disseminating it and reaching back out to folks. And we absolutely are doing our best. We try to be really, really good at listening listening. And we also, as I mentioned previously, try to be really, really good at applying feedback that we receive. So you touched on, the issue of funding and access to capital as an example. And that is a huge problem that we've identified as well. And it's something we've been working as equally with our partners in the agencies on things like SSBCI grants and the I-Corps program, both of which are, run through different government agencies like the Department of Commerce or the U.S. Small Business Administration, as we are with the private sector and the venture capital community and the angel funding community, and trying to reform the way that they operate and think about these problems, and to really try to galvanize actually a national conversation, again, at the local level and the federal level, about the ways in which we approach some of these challenges. So again, this pervasive theme of this panel, I think, is speak up, because we really are listening, and we will continue to try to do that more effectively. And to Martin's earlier point, we're trying to address technical challenges that are impediments to that right now, but we are also trying to address structural challenges in that. And it's really helpful to hear from everyone in this room and people like you.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, and I have to say, keep coming to these meetings and keep going to see where Maria Contreras-Sweet is speaking and reaching out to her staff. And exactly. And I want to.
That's what we want to know, is how do we engage?
Right.
We're innovating on this level, but we don't innovate in a box. And right now, it's like, we're having a Web.1 conversation. We're like, okay, you invite us to the party. Now, when are we going to dance?
Right. And I do want to just mention something that Velvet had mentioned earlier too, which is working in coalition on things like this can oftentimes get you much further when you just feel so frustrated. Working in coalition can sometimes get you sort of that extra push that you need to finally be heard. So I recommend that as well. There were a lot of other questions.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Ava. I'm a software engineer. And my question is, what is one really important resource or initiative that you think that the American people or people in Silicon Valley or in tech don't know about, or like a myth that the most common myth that you think really needs to be dispelled?
I think the speaker before us was talking about the difference between a degree and a title versus a skill set. And so I think that largely, if we could work together to really focus on skills and rather than degrees and titles, I think that we would get a long way towards moving things forward. Thank you. Moving things forward, like Tech Hire and like these other initiatives, My Brother's Keeper. There's a campaign out there called Grads of Life that we're involved with, and the message there is, if you're not looking at broad pipelines of talent, not just the four-year university system, which we obviously should continue to invest in, then you're missing out on the talent that you need. So I think it's be open to where skills come from, where you may not be looking for them now.
Just specifically, I would say that there are block grants and micro grants available through the Department of Labor that speak specifically to opportunities and resources for offering. Offering internships and offering apprenticeships to students and to young people and to all people. And so if you look on the Department of Labor website and a lot of different agencies on apprenticeship programs that a lot of the American people do not know about. And so I would say look up apprenticeship programs. There's a lot of funding for that.
All right.
Hi, my name is Jocelyn Goldfein. I'm a former executive at companies like Facebook and VMware, and I'm currently an angel investor. And I've been working on diversity in tech, both at those companies and on my own, for a number of years. And I would say this is it's a moment of transformation for our industry. And I would say that it's actually become hard to generalize about companies and VC firms and even the universities that feed into us, because some are more advanced or more recognized. Some people don't even recognize that there's really a problem. And so I want to ask about the role that policy and DC can play in kind of bringing along, the laggards versus promoting the front runners. One thing I really noticed about White House Demo Day, you published these lists of companies, of VC firms, and of educational institutions who had made this pledge to work on diversity and inclusion. And I read those lists, and it was really exciting to see all the folks that had come on board. But then I realized as I got to the end of the list, what was even more startling about them was the very prominent firms that were missing. And this pledge was not a very onerous pledge. Dare I say it was fairly cosmetic. It was not hard to agree to. And so I spent my time reading those lists wondering really about who could fail to agree with this pledge. And so I wonder how much of the work you do, you talked about being a talent scout, is about kind of fanfare and positive energy for the companies at the front versus putting more pressure on the companies who are really, and the firms and the universities who are really lagging.
Yeah, that's first of all, a fantastic question. Somebody earlier today asked me post-demo day, sort of what next, right? And my answer actually was that we constructed, or we do construct events in a general sense, like demo day, for a couple of different reasons. The first is that we use them to generate energy and to start a conversation around an issue that we think is a particular challenge that the American population is facing. And in the case of Demo Day, we recognize the pain point of the fact that we are not actually fulfilling our full potential as a country by not recognizing talent in its full spectrum and giving opportunities to folks across that spectrum in the way that we should be. And so we use Demo Day as a sort of finish line across which to drive a large volume of commitments, which you actually just mentioned yourself in the form of what we call a White House fact sheet, which we published on August 4th. On Demo Day. It was about 22 pages long, and it was a list of a bunch of organizations that we heard from who actively reached out to us as part of the planning process of the event, committing to stand up and do something to move the ball forward on this particular issue. And included in that spectrum of organizations were venture capital firms, universities, as you mentioned, private sector organizations, foundations, individuals, et cetera. But in addition to using Demo Day as a sort of arbitrary finish line, right, we also use it as a starting line. And I think to your point and your question, this is just the beginning of the conversation, quite frankly. And a large part of what we're trying to do moving forward from here is actually use this instigation of a national conversation about this issue to try to push, to apply public pressure onto those institutions that haven't recognized the problem to the full extent that they should, and to engage them moving into the future such that we can actually affect the problem in a way that's actually communal and productive.
Wow, so I am so excited that there is such an appetite to have a conversation about policy, and unfortunately I've been getting the dismiss sign, so we're gonna have to wrap up here. But all of us will be around today, and actually there's another policy-focused workshop happening at 1 o'clock, where we're gonna encourage you to build your own advocacy plan. But please seek us out. We are all here. We love to talk about these things. This is what we do all day long. So seek us out. I'm sorry we had to stop so abruptly, but looking forward to the rest of the day. Thank you all for coming. This was great.